I'm Rick, and I'm building Billy. Today, I want to talk about smoothing and sealing. When I say sealing, I'm not talking about a glossy varnish on the surface of the gun that makes it look flash. I'm talking about something that's a base layer that prevents ingress of water. Sealing needs to be done at this stage because you're going to need a waterproof gun when you get around to doing the ballasting and the balancing. Sealing comes after the basic shaping. The shaping is done with heavier abrasive tools like rasps, files, and coarse sandpaper. The coarseness of the sandpaper is usually measured in a number which indicates the size of the grit. The lower the number, the coarser the grit. Shaping uses sandpaper in 40, 60 or 80 grit. Smoothing is a two-step process, and I use sandpapers of 80 and 120 grit. A perfectionist might go to finer grit, but there's really no benefit or need to do so. During shaping, I like to use this paint removal white sandpaper. It contains a lubricant which makes the job easier, and it doesn't clog so fast. But the lubricant can stay on the wood and it can interfere with epoxy or polyurethane finishes. So it's best to avoid the white paper for finishing. I tend to go for brown garnet paper, and I'm also told by a reliable source that this yellow paper is just as good. Before I start shaping, I remove all the metal hardware and put it in a plastic bag for safekeeping. I start with 80 grit paper. I go over the entire gun completely, rolling up the paper to get into the grooves. Wear a mask. Sawdust can play Larry-dooley with your sinuses. Remove all the scratches, and then once you're done, clean the surface off with a brush and then a rag, and go down to the next finer grade of paper. Persist with the 120 grit paper until you've removed all the scratches from the 80 grit paper. Once the surface is right, it's time to do the sealing. I use thinned, penetrating epoxy. It soaks right into the timber. It doesn't come up real shiny, but it's not meant to. The varnish on top of it, that comes up shiny, but not the sealing coat. I mix the epoxy according to the instructions. This is a radical step, I know, but I find it works. Before I start, I like to leave the gun out in the sun for a little while. It tends to heat up a bit and warm the surface of the timber. Then, to paint the gun, I put it in the shade where it starts to cool down a little bit. And this will mean that it'll suck the epoxy in through from the surface. I slap it on with a cheap brush. When the epoxy first goes on, it looks shiny. That's because it's wet. But as it soaks in, it starts to look dull. I just keep on applying it until it stops looking dull. It doesn't soak in anymore. It's saturated. Leave the gun in a dust-free area overnight to let the epoxy cure. And then it's time to go on with the next step, which is the ballasting and balancing.